So to continue our discussion on this very interesting and very important topic, I would now like to invite the participants of our panel on integrity in financial services to the stage. Derval Rowland, Deputy Governor, Consumer and Investor Protection, will chair the panel. In addition to Karen, Derval will be joined by Stephanie Anderson, Public Policy Manager at Meta, Nigel Malidi, Detective Chief Superintendent on Garda Síochána, FIU Ireland, and Suzanne Rogers, Member of the Central Bank Consumer Advisory Group and Research and Policy Analysis at Social Justice Ireland. Welcome.
Díomh Córide Galéir, I hope you are not suffering from a post-prandial slump. I think this is a topic whereby we all have such an incentive to work together on this public good of bringing to bear all our best thinking to try to look at the myriad and layers and levels of this issue. I chair a group in IOSCO, which is a global group of securities regulators, and the group started out post-pandemic in looking at investor risks that were going to arise in the course of COVID-19. And one of the first phenomena that we saw was in the US. Some of you will remember GameStop, because lots of people were at home trading all the time and sharing information with each other in chat rooms and pumping up stock prices that may or may not have merit. Some people may or may not make profits. Others may or may not come in late and get the downside of that. But actually, as the conversation evolved and developed, there was a collective certainty from all the significant global regulators that frauds and scams was the key issue. You hear that actually when the Governor and colleagues go to international economic meetings. The epidemic of frauds and scams is huge. And it's a coincidence of a number of things. It's as Karen said, there's no need to rob a bank anymore. It's old-fashioned. You might get caught, although we have a penchant in Ireland for taking a JCB and trying to take a cash machine out of a wall from time to time. But I think that's gone out of fashion as well, because it's much easier to go to the marketplace where everybody is. And the marketplace is online, and that's a global reality. If you look to other parts of the world, and you heard it this morning in different angles, we're actually quite old-fashioned in Europe, really. Technology is the driving force. If you travel in Singapore and in other countries, China is making great strides with inclusion, so too is India, and it's all online. Kenya did amazing work with mobile phones to make sure they had financial inclusion decades ago. But in Europe, we're online as well. So it's much easier to socially engineer you in the marketplace you're in with romance, fraud scams, and they're on the rise. So actually people are willingly handing over their money to you. This role of the central bank is we are one of a number of national actors that have a responsibility in promoting awareness about frauds and scams. And actually, I'll give full credit to our comms team. We're starting a media campaign this week on can you spot a scam artist, and I hope you'll help us get the information out there, because we recognize personal awareness is really important. We also have a role in, you'll all understand, our role is to authorize the providers of financial services. But one of the most typical frauds and scams is to steal the identity of a legitimate firm, look really close in terms of your presentation and your fraudulent offering, and try to scam people with offerings that are too good to be true and get them to invest their money with you. A key feature of all of this is it's global, it's international. The payment system, as we've heard, is getting faster, so the money can move very quickly. And in fact, all of your money can be gone long before you can do anything about it, and it most likely is not in this jurisdiction. So for us at IOSCO level and at national level, We're trying to do all we can about taking down financial fraudulent offerings from the internet. We have a capacity to web scrape. We've asked to be one of the first flaggers in the Commission Amman legislation so that we can have quick access to the internet service providers. And a lot of the scams online are not completely finishing online. They'll start online, start a conversation with you online, and then take you offline. So there's no evidence or trail. So it's becoming more difficult. So without a doubt, there's a number of angles here to explore today, and we'd love your questions. So I'm going to ask you to see if you do have any questions at the end of each round. We'll try to do 3 rounds and see how we go. But in terms of data, I think what we're seeing in the Central Bank of Ireland, I asked the guys to pull the figures in terms of what we are seeing. And we have published since 2016 more than 3,500 warning notices about fraudulent offerings here. But what we also see is we're putting it up on our own webpage. We've had more than 40,000 hits on that page from the public looking at that information in March of 2024. So you can see the public are concerned, and there's a huge trend upwards of the public being interested in this. And just to give you some other figures, and we think there's vastly under-reported figures, we have had about 50 cloning scams reported to us since 2022. We've had about 230 complaints involving a sum of over €7 million. And we think that's a major underreporting because people often don't actually want to tell you how much they've lost. There's a lot of shame and embarrassment about this. And of course, key to all of this is An Garda Síochána, who've done fantastic work and we'll hear from momentarily. But it's a problem that is across the communications regulators, financial regulators. It's obviously a law and order issue with crime. It's global and it's local. So we really need to think about how the actors can come together to work on this topic. So maybe I will turn then to some of the questions to my panel. And Nigel, I might start with you. What do you see from a law enforcement point of view? And the trend that Karen described in her home country, is that mirroring the issues that you see in Ireland?
Yeah, it would be the very same. I was surprised by the similarities between the way crime has evolved in Denmark and the way it has evolved in Ireland. And I just go back to my own career when I started as a detective Garda. Most of my work would have been involved investigating robberies in petrol stations, banks, post offices, bookies every day. As a detective sergeant, I was involved in investigating cash in transit robberies, you know, organised criminal groups who were targeting them. They're all a thing of the past now, really. They're very rare. You'll hear about them or read about them in the news. And people are moving to the easier type of crime, which is fraud. Criminals are like, they are business people, and they will do what business people do. They will look for low risk business with a high return. And fraud is definitely offering that low risk, high return incentive for them. So what we're seeing here in Ireland is similar to the scams that you have outlined, and I'll just go through it. Obviously, we know that there's greater ability for criminals to engage in cyber-enabled crime due to developments in IT, and their ability to do it remotely in any part of the world and target people here in Ireland or elsewhere without having to, not like a bank robbery where you go in, you're putting people in fear, you're looking into the whites of their eyes. There's a danger you could be confronted by the guards and shot. This danger isn't there for them. They're sitting in a safe, warm environment inside in their rooms, quite detached from the actual reality of the crime that they're committing or the pain that they're inflicting on the victims of that crime. So over the period of COVID, so we've had a huge transfer from our normal commerce environment to the e-commerce environment and e-payments, and particularly at COVID, we saw a huge transfer to e-payments necessitated by COVID. And in that time, we saw a huge increase in fraud-related crimes reported to An Garda Síochána, a 40% increase over the period of 2020 to 2022. It's now settled down. We have about 1,000 to 1,100 incidents of crime, fraud-related crime reported to us each month, which is still quite a significant number. But 80% of those crimes we estimated to be in the area of scams and the scam type offences that you read about and you hear about every day. In 2023, it's reported to us 83 million was stolen. That's the reported figures that we have. And the biggest areas of crime, or the biggest scams that were taken, was the investment fraud was the biggest. There's about 29 million stolen last year in investment fraud, and the average per person that was affected by that was 81,000 euros. So for one transaction, the criminal can gain 81,000. If you go into business email compromise, again, 10 million taken last year, but an average of 51,000 taken. Again, you can see the attraction for the criminal in investing their time in those particular types of crimes, because there's a much higher return in them, rather than going for the widespread phishing and smishing type scams or account takeover. Although they're still quite lucrative because there's huge numbers involved in it. Like the account takeover, 10 million last year, but 9,500 per injured party was taken. And then we have the romance frauds, again, very sinister and kind of, when you get into the human side of those cases, the upsetting side of it, I'd be obviously familiar with the human side of those cases and people who've lost vast amounts of money, but they're averaging about 10,000 euros per crime or transaction that people are losing. So very lucrative for criminals to get involved in that, and all from the comfort of their bedroom or their office or wherever it is. So business email compromise, our recent figures would indicate that there's a kind of reduction in that number, probably because of greater awareness and education, but because they have formal structures in place, it'll be a business, an organisation, they'll be dealing with the banks. So when they get a request to change the payment details to another bank account, they can automatically have a protocol or a procedure in place to verify whether this is a genuine request, and they can go to the bank. So we hope that many of the businesses that have been affected by this, or potentially will be affected by this, have put these protocols in place which will mitigate against the risk. However, the romance frauds and the investment frauds, they're primarily individuals that are targeted, and they don't have the same supports or the same ability to mitigate against the risk that businesses would have, or larger organisations would have. So that's what we see in relation to those types of crimes, and I think that's common, not just in Denmark, but everywhere where these crimes go. And the criminals know that these people are vulnerable, that they're open to have their money stolen from them in this way. That's basically what I say about that, unless you have any question in relation.
Maybe I'll ask Stephanie next, because the phenomena is an online phenomena. That's the marketplace, that is the introducer between criminals and the victims. How do you see that manifesting for internet service providers, and what particularly the trends that Meta are seeing?
Thanks, Derval, and just want to start by saying thanks for inviting me to attend the conference, speak on this panel on a very timely and important issue. I think, I suppose as a conversation progresses, I look forward to talking a bit more about what Meta is proactively doing in this space. But to answer your specific question, what we do is spend quite a bit of time looking at the life cycle of a scam. And what we noted is that most scams follow a particular series of events. And it involves one particular iteration building on the next. And some of those steps repeat themselves, but it is a series of steps, one building on the other. And what really that tells us is that each industry, each sector, unfortunately doesn't have a line of sight from beginning to end. So therefore, the solution requires a joined up approach. So we kind of, I suppose, identify, so step one is when they build infrastructure, the scammers. So it might be acquiring devices or SIM cards. Step two is, I suppose, getting those assets prepared, and that's with software, putting software in place, the view to setting up a fake account or compromising a legitimate account. Third would be engaging with users, building trust, making an offer of an opportunity. The next stage would be executing, so that could be trying to sell a fake product or stealing money and acquiring stolen goods. And then the next stage would be kind of cleaning up after themselves, and that could be money laundering. So we only see a particular window in that cycle. We would see something like romance scams I've been talking about. That repeats the engage and execute stage over and back, for example. So the ability for particular industries to act on those particular steps is limited. So as a result, I suppose with Meta, we find that scammers use our platform to hook an individual, to build trust, and move them off our platform, which is where the visibility ends. Which is obviously a huge challenge across our sector, but all sectors. So as a result, it requires joined-up thinking, cross-sectoral approach, and which is exactly what I suppose this panel represents today.
So, of course, that's the very reason why we understand that those who can have a systemic view and even a global view and a local view will be so important in helping to solve this, because at least we can put the typologies together and all the steps and try to break that progression through. Because, Suzanne, if I ask you, from a consumer point of view, they haven't a hope of seeing all of this sophisticated steps, and they will be on the receiving end of these threats without the support of systems or companies. So what's the lived experience of consumers, and how's the harm showing up for them?
But firstly, like Stephanie, I just want to say again, thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this panel. Kind of very conscious that I'm not in the financial sector, so I think it's encouraging that the central bank does reach out to organisations who aren't directly involved in finance. So I just want to acknowledge that the central bank is talking to and listening to. So I just want that out there. It goes back to that same point, like, our economy is changing. The governor mentioned earlier on about, transporting large sums of money. How we move money around has changed. We've gone from, as you said, the bank robbery, why would you bother? We've gone from the bag snatch to the phone snatch. I had a phone snatched out of my hand on a London high street about 2 years ago. Now, thankfully, I have nothing on it. So my Candy Crush is probably gone, but that's about it. But it's how, it's how we operate. It has changed. And like that, like with the bank raid, if my communion money had been robbed out of the Dublin Savings Bank in Phibsborough in the 70s, I was covered, and I didn't feel responsible for that. So I think the fact that we use the word loss suggests sloppy behaviour, or that sense of shame is very, very, very real with all of these. And we don't see so much of it coming. Like, it's purchase scams. You buy something on the net that doesn't arrive. Ticket scams, major sporting events, major concerts. So these are all really, really creative ways. So as you said, once you get the hang of one thing, something else will come along to sort of catch you off guard. It's that digital space really is where all of this fraud is coming from. So again, if you kind of look at, so I kind of pulled a few figures as well, like those authorised push payments fraud losses where I actually send you the money of my own volition. In Ireland, figures I had was about 10 million in Ireland. 1.1 billion though was lost in the UK, and half of that was to that authorised push payment process. So again, it's that shame. I'm responsible for this. This is my fault. I think we're probably reluctant to declare some of that, especially if they're kind of small amounts. Again, I'd imagine everybody in the room has had texts about VAT, especially post-Brexit. That's a very, that's something you recognise. We all shop online. So if you're only going to lose maybe €1.80, would you be bothered reporting it? But as you said, if it's 300,000, you may not want to report it because you would have entered into an investment scam as a savvy businessman, as somebody who saw an amazing opportunity. So to have to admit that you were fooled is a really, really difficult space to be in. And again, some of the reading I was doing, like one study found that 30% of those who lost their life savings in bank fraud had major depression in the following 2 years. I was quite surprised that's quite that low. Another concluded that a negative wealth shock increased long-term mortality risk for US adults aged over 51 and over. So it's that link between what happens digitally and what happens in the real world. So these are digital harms that have real life impacts psychologically, never mind the financial loss. I mean, if you lose, I don't know anybody, I mean, I can't speak for anybody. I couldn't afford to lose 51 grand. I don't even know if I'd have that. So there's the financial loss as well as that. But I keep going back to, like, money itself is an instrument of trust. Money doesn't exist without trust. Those two words are almost interchangeable. So without trust, as you said, in the system, that I've moved my money to a place that I know where it's going to. The financial system doesn't operate if we don't trust it. So this is so important that if we are being all encouraged to go online, to move our money online, that we are able to trust that. And I think it's that harms, as you said, that constant vigilance as well, that's required. Sometimes every text, every email, every deal that you see online, is this, should I, will I press send, add to cart, whatever, that is going to erode the entire system. And that was one of the key themes this morning, is that the financial system underpins pretty much all of our other systems. So this is really important, that as consumers, we trust when you make us go online, when you force us to use a banking app, that I can actually trust that app. So I think that's really going to be key moving forward.
So I think I read a number of years ago, Irish people are more willing to disclose their private health information than they are to disclose their private financial information. So on a personal level, there'll be a lot of reticence for any of us to talk about this. And no one wants to be a fool, and it could happen to all of us, and it does happen to many of us, and we're not sophisticated. Of course, the bank app has to be safe, but if we're working in a global atmosphere where the marketplace is online, then the online system has to be safe as well. And we heard in the earlier talks, we can sometimes be defined by the past, but it's much harder to be cutting edge into the future. So, and it's a common problem that we're all facing. So this is definitely a global good, if we could all work together on the many levels and layers to work on this. So Karen, how are you approaching this in Denmark? And how hard is it to get a whole of system response?
Yeah, actually first I was going to pick up on some of the things that
Sure.
you should just mention, because I think this thing also having the examples out there is very important. And just to mention, for example, just last week there was a woman in Denmark who's been working on these issues. She's been one of the advisors on how to avoid all these kind of things, and she was frauded. And she said it publicly. And that was a lot of money, but this thing that there are actually someone who steps forward and giving the examples of what is happening out there, I think that's quite important. So then coming back to your question, I think if we go back in time, and I think at least in Denmark, we've been quite good at cooperating on the investigation side. But what we've been really doing here in 2024 is also to step up on the coordination and cooperation internally in Denmark on the prevention side. So basically, as you are also saying, getting institutions and organizations who are not normally part of financial sector, it can be the elderly organizations, get them into these discussions and how do we prevent these kind of things. Also, cooperation between authorities. I mean, we're a financial supervisor and a regulator. It's another authority who are in charge of the Ponzi schemes when we see those. But basically, many of the investment scams we see, it's hard to tell the difference. So therefore, we have also started working closer together as authorities. So this idea that we need to have a broader network and a broader cooperation and coordination on the prevention side is something which has played a role in 2024 for us.
Okay. So then, Nigel, how are we compared to Denmark? Are we unique and entirely different? What you see, the trends and scams here, and from a law enforcement point of view, what should we all be doing? What could we do more?
Yeah, no, I'd say we're very similar, and it's the transnational aspect of this crime, because it's global, and the MOs are the same, and the way that they do things are the same. So we're seeing the exact same things. As I said earlier, when I spoke earlier, you could have a person in one part of the world committing crime in another part of the world, but that money has to move somewhere. And generally, any of the investigation I've been involved in, the money moves across borders to try and get it out of the reach of law enforcement, that they can't seize it, to try and move it to other jurisdictions where there's lesser law enforcement, lesser regulation in place, so that they can more easily access it. So the problem for us is when this transnational element to the crime is retrieving the money and identifying the culprits. And that brings a couple of things into play. First of all, we have to have legislation and powers in place to conduct our investigations. I think domestically in Ireland, I think we're very well served. I wouldn't have too many complaints about the powers that we have, both investigative and then the punishments that are handed out, or the offences that are created and the punishments that are handed out. I'd have one or two issues with some of the legislation we have, but generally speaking, I think we're very well served. Internationally then, I think at EU level, we're constantly getting new EU directives out in relation to money laundering offences and fraud type offences. And they're quite welcome. They give us greater powers in accessing different types of information. And across Europe, we all commonly work knowing that each police force has access to the same levels of information or the same ability or the same powers that we have here. However, the difficulties arise when we go to different jurisdictions, and it's how different law enforcement agencies interact with each other. So if we identify money moving to one jurisdiction, we'll have to call on another police or law enforcement agency to carry out investigations for us. And I'll just give you two examples that have happened in the last couple of weeks. So 2 weeks ago, we got notified by a European country, the police force in a European country. They were conducting investigations into a large organised criminal gang. They seized 20 million cash, but they also identified a bank account here in Dublin that was used for money laundering. They contacted us, provided us with enough information that we had reasonable grounds to suspect that that bank account was being used for money laundering. And the superintendent issued a Section 17 freezing order on that account, and that was served on the bank. From the time we were notified by that police force until the time that that bank account was seized was 3 hours. It was very efficient, very well done, and that's what you have to do in these circumstances. You can seize the money before it's moved on, and then conduct your inquiries into the people behind that account and further investigate them for prosecution and conviction. A week before that, an investigation we were conducting, we identified a bank account in another European country, and likewise we got onto the particular law enforcement agency in that jurisdiction. We gave them the information in relation to the bank account. It was been used for money laundering, and we would have expected that they would have carried out the same inquiries or work that we carried out here. They got back to us because of the type of investigation that they do over there. It's judge-led. They had to go to the judge to get a seizure order. We were able to do it with the superintendent in Garda Síochána. They had to go to a judge. The judge wasn't satisfied. He needed a mutual assistance request to come from us, which would have taken months, if not years. So it's completely, that whole investigation would have broke down at that point, because you have to act quick, you have to act with speed, and the mutual assistance request would have slowed the whole process down. So there's different behaviours, different criminal justice systems in place in different jurisdictions, and they conduct investigations separately or differently than we do here. So it's getting to understand what's required in different jurisdictions is the problem. I think the lawmakers and the EU and then third countries outside the EU do have powers in place, but it's understanding how we can interact with each other. Now, it's not all negative. We do have, for that case that I spoke to you about, that we froze the money within 3 hours, that came through a network. It's a Europol network called AMON. It's the Anti-Money Laundering Operational Network. And basically it was set up to create an informal network of law enforcement agents that could have this informal contact and have speed of thought and speed of transfer of information, so that we could act that quick. So that was a very positive outcome. Interpol then, we have huge investigations going on with them. You'll be aware of Operation Jackal. You all may have read about the Black Axe gang. It's a West African, Nigerian-based gang that are globally active and particularly active in our jurisdiction, both domestically and internationally. So we identified about 1,100 people associated with that gang. Now, the vast majority of them would be money mules. They would have been recruited to provide bank accounts so that it facilitates the movement of the money through those accounts and then onwards to other bank accounts in other jurisdictions. We've convicted about 450 people in relation to just money laundering alone. And we've conducted inquiries targeting the leadership of that gang. There's about 100 people we've identified, just over 100 people arrested that are connected to the organisation of that gang. About 10 people have been convicted of facilitating and enhancing an organised criminal group, and we've about 7 people arrested, with 2 facing trial in January for directing the operations of that group. But they're a significant organisation. They're not just operating in Ireland, they're operating throughout the world. They're in every country. But we have good legislation in place to tackle them. We're using gangland legislation that was introduced in 2006 and 2007 to tackle that organised criminal group. And then we're using our international networks through Europol and Interpol to tackle those crimes. So we have quite positive stories. We do have difficulties in some areas, but we do have quite positive stories in relation to international cooperation.
So it's quite heartening because we can see the beginnings of, you need the powers, but this is an intelligence-driven problem where you have to move very fast to solve the problem. So there's an operational capability and effectiveness right across the system. So there's layers of approaches to this, but from...
Yeah, and can I just say, a lot of our intelligence comes from financial institutions in Ireland and abroad, but particularly in Ireland, through our financial intelligence unit. A lot of our investigations are initiated through the suspicions raised within the financial institution, so we're very grateful for that, and through the central bank, of course.
And that's, I think someone else said it this morning, that's a conference in itself. Information sharing, public-private partnerships. I want to say that the Garda Síochána and particularly the banking and some of the payments firms do a great job in sharing suspicious transactions, suspicious activity reports. They get together and do typology and information sharing, and the new AML regulation has a great potential with data-enhanced privacy approaches with, I think it's Article 75, that allows us to think about data privacy and enhancing information sharing in more real time. So, because it's through the banks and the payments firms and the financial services firms that this is happening, we're kind of second line. So it's really important that they're well aware of what's going on. But from a consumer point of view, Susan, how do you think we should approach this to better protect consumers?
Collaboration is a word that was used a lot this morning, and I think that's really, really the key. And something else I scribbled down from this morning for my notes is, it's exactly that. Financial stability is a global public good. So that's part of this conversation. So yes, it's down to the financial institutions. The onus is on the bank sending the monies to do the check. Is there more that the bank receiving the money could be doing? So a sending, and again, these are kind of notes I've made from reading, but like the sending bank will log a transition as fraud, but maybe the receiving bank either didn't know or didn't take action. So there's something that can be done there. And I suppose, unfortunately, the vast majority of push, those kind of APP scams, they originate on social media sites. I think 72% of them come from social media sites, 16% from telecommunication networks. So that obviously has to be part of the connection as well. So no matter how savvy I am as an individual, if I'm being bombarded with stuff every time I log on to a social media site and I'm not really sure what's happening. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And even just again to go back to the different types of scams, in the UK, Santander noted football-related ticket scams rose by 82% last year, and again half of those came from one particular social media site, with another 15% coming from somewhere else. So there's a real widespread of actors in this space who really need to be putting the consumer's best interests at heart. I mean, the Consumer Protection Code is a big conversation what they're having at the moment, and it says there the firm must secure the customer's best interest, act honestly, fairly and professionally in accordance with the best interest of its clients. So that needs to be spread further than the financial sector and look at other, as you said, the platforms and all of that, that their business model doesn't cause their customer harm. I think there's a lot to be going on there. And because I love a conversation about moral hazard as well, so you'll have to allow me this. But there's this argument as well, if the banks cover 100% of the losses through fraud, sure, will we just lose the run of ourselves and say, yeah, go on, have my phone, tippy-tap, click on things. I don't necessarily agree with that because, as we said, the shame and the sense of personal failure linked with making a poor financial decision. As you said, we'll discuss our sexual health, our mental health. Do you want to look at my credit card statement? Absolutely not. So it is that it's still a taboo. And like we spoke about it before, I got into a rogue cab in a taxi, in a taxi rank, it wasn't a taxi rank, in JFK in March, and I'm in the car going, oh, this is happening, oh, I think this is happening. I'm saying it here publicly in a room full of strangers, I didn't actually tell my family that that's what I had done because I felt so responsible. I was an idiot. Why didn't I see it? So stupid, so stupid. So I took on full responsibility for the actions of the perpetrator. So it's all of that gets messed up in your head. But I think to police it all is possible from, say, especially from the platforms and the social media sites. But I appreciate that it's going to cost money to do that. But I do think it's definitely one where it's very hard to stay one step ahead. As you said, you know, one window opens, you know, it's closed, it's open again. As we said, like, there's no more bank raids for a reason, because they don't make sense anymore. I will willingly get into the cab and hand you my money when I get out at the hotel. So I think it's definitely, it's the collaboration and realizing where some of the harms come from and then trying to tackle that.
So I think it's really fair then to say, Stephanie, what are Meta doing about this? Because what we have identified is that the marketplace is more the internet service providers, and we all have our role to play in this.
That's it, absolutely. So first of all, I suppose, despite what might sometimes be said externally, we definitely have a business incentive to tackle frauds and scams, be it for just our regular users, our business users who rely on our platforms to expand, grow, reach their audience, content creators, advertisers. We definitely have an incentive to tackle this. What's obviously challenging is that fraudsters are constantly evolving and adapting to the new policies and processes we put in place. So what we've learned over time is to focus on behaviors rather than content, because the content can slightly change, but we think that the behaviors relatively stay the same, and based on that life cycle I spoke about earlier. So for example, our technology tells us that an example of a behavior that indicates a fraudster is like bulk friend requests. That's a signal that this is someone who's about to do something that's very suspect. We're investing heavily in this space. Since 2016, we've invested 20 billion in tackling frauds and scams. We've 40,000 employees working on safety and security. We implement, I suppose, what we call community standards across our, we say, organic or non-paid content. So those are the rules of what is and isn't allowed on Facebook and Instagram. We have a set of advertising standards as well about what people are and aren't allowed to advertise about, be it the creative and also the text. And we're constantly updating those standards. Those are globally applied. So we consult experts whenever we see a trend emerging and we want to feed that into the system. Speaking of, I suppose, APP, authorized push payment fraud, Suzanne as well mentioned this. We know that fake accounts, for example, is an area that tackling fake accounts would certainly help with that. So we've put a lot of effort into that. We produce quarterly reports on the number of fake accounts that we take down. And the last report publicly available was April to June 2024, and we removed 1.2 billion fake accounts. And 99.7% of those were caught by our technology, our AI, and most of those never would have interacted with a single user. So we try and proactively find those fraudsters before they interact with their users. That's the objective. But we do have a three-part approach to tackling frauds and scams. The first was detection and enforcement. So again, we apply our standards. We remove content that's in violation. We use AI to detect that proactively. We take on board user reports. We use machine learning to search for keywords that are prevalent within frauds and scams. We block keywords. We work with our business users to roll out something called our brand protection tool so that they can protect their IP, their logos, trademarks, and fight against counterfeit goods. And then we're also working on some new methods of detection as well. So we're testing facial recognition technology in most of the world, apart from the UK and the EU, where we're engaging with regulators on that. But that is primarily to focus on targeting celeb-bait scams. And then when we look at something like partnerships in education, in Ireland, we're lucky to work with BPFI. We engage with them on a financial crime roundtable, which is been the primer, I think, for the National Payment Strategy, new anti-fraud forum, which we're happy to engage in. We engage with IBEC and that similarly, and we're about to work with BPFI on a new consumer education awareness campaign. When it comes to, I suppose, sharing information with our other stakeholders, we've got some examples internationally of how we do this, working with banks in the UK and Australia on a program called FIRE. It's the Fraud Intelligence Reciprocal Exchange Program. And that involves banks sending us URLs or links to fraudulent content that we can take action on. And even though it's not rolling out here in Ireland yet, that that intelligence feeds into our systems and allows us to take action on content in somewhere like Ireland. An example of how that particular program has been useful is based on just 185 links we received through that FIRE program, we were able to take down 20,000 fake accounts, and that was on content or ticket sales, ticket concert scams. So that had a big impact on users in that jurisdiction. And then I suppose when it comes to law, I suppose our legal action, we work with law enforcement. We have a law enforcement outreach team that engage in any requests that were received. We take our own legal action against scammers as well. And we also work with regulators through various channels. We have a number of Irish regulators onboarded. So that was a bit fast. Hopefully I covered enough there.
And that's a lot, and it's great to see that. And I know that I visited Google recently, and they agreed it's an action they're taking in a number of countries, and it's something of the IOSCO work we're doing to check with us before they take money from an advertiser saying they're a financially regulated entity. And that, for us, we've seen great progress in reducing the number of those kind of fake financial promotion scams. So the more that there's real initiatives working together. I failed dismally in allowing you guys to ask some questions. We have none online, but I want to just take a moment to see if anybody would like to put up their hand. We'll take a few questions and try to do a sudden omnibus answer. We're not saying we have the answers. We think it's a real issue. I'd be delighted to take a question here from the front. I think we'll have a very eminent question here. And if anybody else would like to put their hand up. And if you'd like to say who you are so that people can know.
John Hedigan, the Irish Banking Culture Board. I'm sure it won't be a very eminent question, but I was very encouraged by Nigel Mulready's comments about the speed with which you can act here to freeze an account. The problem is, of course, with other jurisdictions that I think you adverted to as well, where unfortunately they're not as well equipped with regulations to do that. Can anybody tell us, is there any action being taken to try to get other jurisdictions to get their acts together and to be able to provide quick methods of freezing accounts like that? I did have personal experience of a person I know quite well who did get defrauded of a very substantial amount of money, and the money disappeared into an account in somewhere in the Caribbean, and there didn't seem to be any ability to get at that particular account. Is there anything happening on an international, EU or international scale, to try to get these jurisdictions that have not yet got themselves properly equipped to deal with these kind of scams?
So I'm just going to see if anybody else would like to ask a question, and I'll abuse the time a tiny bit just to see if there are further other questions. You're all incentivized to think about coffee. So maybe, thank you for the question. Would you like to take a go?
Yep, thanks very much for your question, and a very good question. Yeah, so as I outlined in the previous answer I gave, so the anti-money laundering operational network, EMON, is the system that Europol have set up to try and break through those, the barriers that they're faced in jurisdictions because of their legal processes that they have there, and to try and make informal contact and to make it easier. And that's how we, that's how we seized that money. It was through that informal network. Interpol had a greater international, and that's true probably around Europe. So when you're dealing with different jurisdictions, again, different criminal systems that are in place, but Interpol have an operation, Hayachi, and that's set up particularly with the aim of quick transfer of information to jurisdictions that are probably outside the EU, and we're fairly active in that as well. So I think last year they seized or retrieved 40 million euros in value around the world. But you're kind of reliant on jurisdictions or countries that want to be part of it. They're not obliged to be part of it. They're volunteering, and the fact that they're volunteering would show that they have an interest in that particular aspect of money laundering or countering money laundering. So they're going to be willing participants anyway. So they're likely to have infrastructure in place to facilitate us go through the legal process to get that money. The difficulty is with countries that are outside, the EU or any other international regulatory framework, where they're not encouraged or they're not obliged to follow any particular any system that would make it easier to retrieve money.
So
I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
To some extent.
I just wondered, is there any movement to try to get those
Yeah, well, I suppose through, through the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the global body that's charged with encouraging greater money laundering or anti-money laundering laws and regulations around the world. That's their main focus, and they do assess countries on the basis of what rules, regulations, and laws they have in place to tackle money laundering, and they're very effective.
I think we're going to have to draw to a close there, but it's a key issue because this is an international phenomena and it goes to the weakest link countries. One of the key enablers here is disruption, and if one can retrieve the money in the payment system. So it's great that the payment system works fast, but we've got to be able to catch problems and get the money back as well. So this is about operational effectiveness, and we need a problem-centric, multi-pronged approach, I think, with powers, policy, tools, operational capability, and international coordination that actually works. I'm sure this is a topic we're all highly motivated actually to get right. So it's something that everybody will have to play their part in the future. Thank you for your time, and thank you to our panel.